Welcome to the Relentless Growth Podcast with myself, Chase Calhoun, and my good friend, Jack Maher. Jack, how are you doing today?
Doing fantastic. Ready to dive in.
Nice. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about discomfort and why leaning into discomfort, both in personal life and business, is usually a path forward and path to better things and a good thing to do. Before we do that, why don't we do a couple, a business win and maybe a little update on what you got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I got an easy win this week. We hired our first plumber this week, which came about in a series of roundabout circumstances. But since we've taken property maintenance in house, obviously you got to have people on call 24 hours a day. And, one of those hardest things to deal with is plumbing, mainly because you're pretty reliant on a third party. And so you can do everything right in-house, but, if they don't come or if they don't do the right thing or if they don't handle it well, it's pretty easy to get off track. And so we found about a guy who just moved to town, out about this opportunity this week and moved pretty quick on it. And so we've got a plumber in-house for the first time. And I think it's really going to help when we brought an HVAC specialist in-house. Even before we tried to do it ourselves, just him interacting with our sub, keeping them on track was a vast improvement. And so I'm expecting the same kind of growth results here. So that's a big win and just kind of an update on our path to vertical integration. So that's been a big win this week.
Well, that's awesome. We were just talking about that this week. So we were going to hire an in-house maintenance tech, and I'm like, I think we need to find a master plumber who can also do some basic maintenance stuff. Cause as you were saying, that's a big one for us. It's a big cost thing too. And so that's awesome, dude. That's really cool. For us, a big win for this week, we got out of the office for a day and went and checked out another market. So somewhere in Arkansas, but it's actually Northeast Arkansas. So it's a couple hours away from us, somewhere that it's been on my radar for a couple of years now, and it's piqued my interest about potentially expanding into at some point. And so it's funny because you can look at it online or on paper and stuff, but actually getting up there and driving around and looking at some ongoing current projects I think it was very helpful. This was a good win. I don't know if we're going to jump and get started up there right this second, but it's definitely something we're going to continue watching and interests me. So it's just good to get up there in person, take a look around at it. So, and as far as updates this week, just very similar. We've got a bunch of a handful of single family and small multifamily projects that are just getting going. So moving dirt and stuff right now, clearing lots. So it's fun part to go out there and look and see a lot of action getting moved on. So it's a good part of the project. All right, man, let's jump into it. So, the topic being discomfort and why it's important to lean into. I think it's something for me, when I think of, personal growth and business growth. And it's almost every part of my journey, both personally and professionally, has almost all come through uncomfortable times. Right. And so it's with business, it's you go through these times where maybe they're stressful or they're hard or something's not going well. And it's a lot of people will maybe not want to deal with that. And so the other side of really dealing and working through that has always pushed me into more growth and better things. And then I also think of leaning into some of that stuff on purpose, why it's important. What was your experience been with it, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think on the personal side, the way the world is today, man, it is so easy to not do hard things. And obviously these things aren't true for everybody. There are still people who struggle, but when you compare us to 50 or 100 or 150 years ago, and when you look at people who did amazing things throughout history, the circumstances generally that they overcame were extreme, compared to what we deal with today. And so I think the thing that I think about is it's relatively easy to show up, work your job, go home, to live that life, which isn't a bad life, but it's not, when you talk about personal growth, it's not something that really moves the needle in an upward trajectory. And so, yeah, I think seeking out those things we're both into endurance sports. And I think that's what attracted me to that on the personal side is it's easy to challenge your body physically. You can play a sport, you can do things, but like challenging your mind, I feel like is really hard. And I feel like endurance sports are one of the only things that do that in our current day and age, because it is all mental. I'm sure from doing the half Ironman, you'll see people out there racing and you're like, man, how are you doing this? Like your body isn't made for this, but they're crushing it, they're killing it. And it's more than 50% mental to me. Once you reach a certain stage of physical fitness, to do great things, it's all in the mind. And so I think that's part of it. And then from the professional side, I think a lot about the book Good to Great and what separates good companies from great companies throughout history. And it's how they responded to adversity. And so there's a couple key inflection points in your professional life where things aren't great, or there's a challenging economy, or there's X or there's Y. And it's how you respond to those which determines your trajectory. And that's kind of, at least based on my memory, what he found was kind of a key factor, was responding to adversity and doing it in the right way is more impactful than, how you handle the good times or anything else. And so I think it's a hugely important conversation and something more people need to think about, of kind of intentionally walking into that pain versus seeking the easy route.
Yeah, I think that the intentionally walking into it, or the choosing to do it, is probably not that going through hard things or going through discomfort in general, there's not a benefit to it, but like when you choose to do it on purpose, I think there's something special that happens there. I think especially as men, like you said, it's like men used to have to do hard stuff with no choice. And I think today, like in our society, like you really don't have to. Like you could work a basic job, make enough money to survive, and then go sit on the couch and play video games and watch sports, right? And be comfortable, right? But man, it's like when I think back in times where like I've either had stress or anxiety or worry about stuff, and then I think about what's moved the needle and like helped with that kind of stuff the most. And there's like nothing that'll help with that more than like choosing to do something really hard on a regular basis. It just makes it less of an issue. And I think it just better prepares you both personally and in your professional life for stuff like that. I think there's other stuff that you could do other than endurance sports, but endurance sports it's a really easy way to force yourself into that mindset and doing hard things on a regular basis. Cause it's like you sign up for a half Ironman and you really don't have a choice. It's either like you're going to really, really suffer when you do the race, or it's like you're going to do hard things on a daily basis to be prepared for it. And so, man, when I think of the endurance sports stuff, I think it's a great example, because like you're literally choosing to do hard things on a daily basis. And then, that culminates in a really hard thing that, is going to be suck. And it is what it is. And it forces you to do that. But for me personally, like I noticed that when I do those really hard things on purpose, it's like I'm not dealing with as much stress personally or in business, or I'm still the stress is still there, but it's just easier to deal with, I guess. And I think it's like a overlap in business. As I've come up in business, there's been times where it's been really hard and really stressful, and it feels like I'm almost not going to be able to make it through this thing. But if you lean into that discomfort and you push through it, when you get to the other side of it, it's like not only do you make it through that, but it's like you're almost exercising that like kind of stress, dealing with discomfort muscle. And like the next thing happens that's even worse, but it's like it's not as big of a deal. And like that just continues to grow and compound. And I think it's business and personal, where I've seen that. So like I said, the more that you can lean into that discomfort, whether it's, I'd say business, like, personal relationships with your wife, like if there's something that is uncomfortable and you like choose not to deal with it, it's just going to make it worse. But if you really lean into it and kind of push through that, it's almost always better on the other side of it.
Well, I think when you talk about stress, I think that's a pretty interesting component of it. Because I think from the outside looking in, most people would think doing something hard adds more stress to your life. And I think what you're saying, and what I would argue, is it's the opposite. It's almost, I think back to, I'm sure you had it happen, whether it was coaches or your parents. If you were playing sports when you were a kid, hey, did you do your best? And if you could answer yes, whether you won or lost wasn't as important. It's important, and it's kind of the same thing I view with hard things. When I'm stressed, 99% of the time, it's thinking about something I should have done or something I didn't do. It's not, hey, I'm stressed because I took action on something, And so I think at least most of the stress in my life comes from looking at the day and thinking, man, I should have gotten X, Y, or Z done, or I should have leaned into that situation more. And so it's definitely true for me. By doing hard things or by getting up and running, I feel better about myself. I feel less stressed. I feel more productive. And so it's harder physically and it's harder mentally, but it's more satisfying. And so you get I get a better sense of peace and like a better sense of comfort from doing those things than from not doing anything. I joke with my wife all the time. When you talk about training for an Ironman, I would take like a rest week, in the middle of training. Mm-hmm. I feel worse that week than at any other point in my training. And it's the most counterintuitive thing of all time. And it's necessary. You have to do stuff like that. But when you get used to doing those hard things, your body needs it. It craves those endorphins. And the same thing mentally, to where that's part of what fuels you. You can twist your mind to like hard things. When we sell houses, we do a lot of walkthroughs with customers, and occasionally you have a challenging customer, and if you don't look at that as a bad thing, and my mind makes it to where, hey, I want to make them happy, and that's my challenge. And I don't really care what they say to me in the interim. My goal is to make them happy. And so it makes something that could be not fun and you could really dread into something that's, hey, this is a challenge. This is an opportunity to figure out how we can make this situation better. And so I think it's a great point about stress and hard things. And I think they're inversely correlated, which I think a lot of people wouldn't think from the outside looking in.
Yeah. It's interesting, or it's worth pointing out too, and I think it's like an Alex Hormozy. He talks about this a lot, like in business and maybe even personal stuff. But like when you look back at your like memories and stuff, a lot of like the positive or the good memories you have that stand out are like the hard times that you went through. So it's when you had that discomfort in your life and you pushed through it, and it's like on the other side of that, it was a positive thing. But like when you look back, it's like those are the things that you remember. So you don't remember the times when like everything was going well and you had all this downtime and it was just, you just don't remember that. You remember the times where, like for me, it's like when we moved here and like that super stressful situation where we were like camping out in this house while we were trying to remodel it. We had no money and like all that stuff. Like it was horrible when we were going through it. Like it was extremely hard. It was extremely uncomfortable. But like now looking back, it's like, it's not only was it like a hard time, it's something I remember, like it stands out in my head. And it, like when I think about it now, it's like a positive memory that I have. So it's just weird how it's like those really uncomfortable times in life, when you choose to push through them and lean into it, it's like not only on the other end of that is it usually a good thing, but like when you look back at it, it's usually a positive memory. And I can think back several times in my life, even, fitness stuff where it was like I did, some kind of super challenging fitness thing. And it was like horrible when you were going through it. And it was like you were just suffering the entire time and just wanting it to be over, but you're not going to quit. And then it's like looking back after, it's like, this core memory. It's kind of like if you played sports or whatever and you did the double days in football and it was super hot one year and it's like, it was like you just thought you were going to die the whole time. And then looking back, like if you think about your football career, it's like one of those core memories that stands out as a positive thing. So it's just interesting how even our own minds, like when we're going through them, it's really uncomfortable. But again, on the other side of that, not only is it something you get through, it makes you better, but then when you look back on it, it's almost like a positive core memory. So it's just interesting how that, at least for me, that's been my experience. I don't know if you've experienced that at all with anything in your life.
No, I think you're right. I think you're spot on. I think athletics is something that that is easy to see that in. I feel like that's a pretty relatable thing to most people. And I see it too in, when you talk about personal growth, there's obviously maintaining, positive progress on the physical side. And then there's mental. And we talked about mental in terms of endurance sports, but I think kind of the harder thing for some people is like mental in terms of, hey, actually continuing to grow your mind, when you're not in school or you're not doing something like that. And so I think for most people, reading a book is harder than going to the gym from like a wrapping your mind around it standpoint. And so even like that sounds like a silly thing, but like doing things like that, educating yourself, challenging yourself. Hey, I'm going to read a book a month. A couple years ago, my goal for the year was to read a book a week. And so it was a lot of books. I ended up at 67. I read way too much that year, in all honesty, but it was a lot of fun. But like challenging yourself with stuff like that, I think it's easy to challenge ourselves physically because it kind of comes natural to us. But once we get past school, like the thought of reading or the thought of intentionally sitting down and listening to a podcast and like applying it to your life, not just consuming it, but making a plan from it. It's easy. We consume media all day long, and most of it might be fantastic information, but if you never sit down and say, how am I going to use this? Not that it's bad to just listen, but if you don't make a plan from it, it's not going to have as big an impact in your life. And so I think slowing down, listening, making a conscious effort to do those things or read a book, I think is ways to stretch your mind mentally that I think some people think about as kind of like an easy thing. But I think for a lot of people, it's a difficult thing. And a lot of people, I would bet over 50% of people don't read a book cover to cover after they graduate school. And I think, in my opinion, reading is the greatest thing you can do for your personal, professional, anything growth. I don't care if it's Twilight fan fiction or a nonfiction book. Just the act of reading, it helps me process things better. It makes you better at math. There's all these studies out there, the impact it has on your life. And so I think that's something that I wouldn't have really thought about when we were going into this conversation, but it's kind of a really simple thing that everybody can do. Hey, read a book cover to cover, in the next month. That's kind of a simple application standpoint that's challenging for most people. And then I think they will serve them well to try that.
But I think it goes into that comfort thing. So I think of like, you want to do things that are comfortable, and sometimes you got to choose to not. I think reading's a good example. I mean, even for me, because so one of my daily like non-negotiable things is to read 10 pages, and so not 60 books a year, but I'm getting through a couple. But if I know that if I just do 10 pages a day, like that compounds, and I get through books faster than you would think. And but like I catch myself like the reading 10 pages, very simple. Like if you just sit down for a few minutes and do it. But it's like, it's easy to push those things off. And it's like, you got to kind of lean into that. And I have to force myself almost every day to not only read the 10 pages, but I'll try to do that earlier on, because I know that's something that's easy for me to push off. And again, it's super valuable. But if I'm being 100% honest, like it's easier for me to go work out than to read 10 pages. Like if it were up to my own choice, like I'd always choose the workout over the reading. But because I've made the reading, that's something that's a priority to me. Like I have to force myself to do that. And like I said, I'll usually do it early on, because if I don't, it's one of those things where if I don't get my reading done like early in the day, it's easy for that just to get pushed off and to not happen. So I think even simple stuff like that, it can be, it's easy. It's way easier to not do it at all than it is to force yourself to actually do it. But sometimes you just got to force yourself to do it.
No, I think that's spot on. And I like the, 10 pages a day. That's one of the components of 75 hard, that, is a challenge a lot of people do. And I think in the other thing, which I'm sure you've experienced this, is probably a lot of times I would bet you read more than 10 pages, because, you get in the habit of it, you get on a roll and you're like, well, I got 10 more minutes. I'll do this. And so approaching it from a small standpoint and building on it, which we've talked about in previous episodes on things, I think is a pretty good way to do it. because it is, yeah, hey, I'm going to read this book. It's 250 pages. That's daunting. But if you think about, hey, in the next 25 days, that book will be finished. That's super achievable from a 10 pages a day standpoint. And so, yeah, I think breaking down the progression of your goals into those small chunks, I think, is a really good takeaway.
Yeah. We're talking about leaning into discomfort. You just mentioned 75 hard, which I don't know why I didn't think about bringing that up earlier on, because that's a good example. Have you done that before?
I haven't. I would love to. The only reason I haven't, and it's absolutely 100% an excuse, is because
I can feel it.
Yeah, 100% it is. I'm acknowledging it. Just with kids getting the second workout 4 hours apart. That's like the only thing that holds me back from doing it. In all honesty, I would love to do it. It sounds super fun and super challenging, and I probably need to figure out a way to do it now that we're talking about it. But have you done it?
I have a couple of times, and so I've done it more times than I've completed it, because it took me 2 tries the first time to get it done. So I highly recommend it. I would love to do it with you, but not while I'm training for this Ironman. maybe after that. I think it's a great example of doing something that's like uncomfortable, like really uncomfortable on purpose, and there's a ton of positive benefits to it. I think it's more, it's a physical challenge, but it's more of a mindset, I think it's more of a mindset thing than anything else. I'll recommend it to guys sometimes, like they're struggling mentally, or things aren't going well or whatever. And I'm like, I know it sounds counterintuitive or it sounds crazy. Like, try doing 75 hard, and see, get through that and see how you feel on the other end of that. It definitely harder with kids. I did it at one point with a newborn. And so my one recommendation would be is like 45-minute walks outside. We did a lot of 45-minute walks, pushing the stroller. Better done during the spring or summer than in the middle of the winter, because it's like a whole nother hassle when you got to bundle up because it's freezing outside. But yeah, I've done it in the past, and I highly recommend it. I think it's just that it's definitely something that's uncomfortable, but forcing yourself through that. And it's like, with anything, I think that something like 75 hard, the endurance races, like a challenging part of your business or anything like that, on the other side of it, like getting through that really uncomfortable thing feels really good. And it just helps
and I think, to jump in there, when you talk about guys who are dealing with things, I think that's one of the powers of hard things. And, it's counterintuitive that, hey, I want to pursue something really hard while I'm also going through something hard in another part of my life. But I think sometimes that's the beauty of physical things, is you can't help, if you're training or if you're doing X or if you're doing Y, you couldn't concentrate on a different problem during the last 30 minutes of your 4-hour bike ride. Like, your mind won't let you. You have to be concentrated on what you're doing. And so I think that's part of the benefit of the physical side of it, is it forces you to get out of your head. If all you do is sit there and think about, hey, what's going wrong or this and that, then it's really easy to get overwhelmed. And we've all probably been in places like that where we're not operating at our best. And my coach calls it negative stacking, where you take one thing and something else happens, and you don't view them as two independent events. You just add it, and you add it, and you add it. And then before long, you've got this stack of negative things. And it's like, man, that's a big deal. But if you do consider them as separate things, and I think athletics or training is one of the things that helps me process that, is when you're doing that, if I'm running and it's 99 degrees outside and 90% humidity, I'm not thinking about whatever I should be thinking about. I'm thinking about how miserable I am, in all honesty. But you're separating your mind from those other things going on in your life, and that's a key thing, because you've got to give yourself time away from those big problems you're dealing with. And I think that's something that's important with those hard physical activities.
Yeah, it's the again, I keep coming back to the forcing yourself to do it even though you don't want to. Like the endurance training stuff right now, like I'm doing that, and it's like I'm a strong swimmer. And so, like, the swim, for some reason, whenever I have the swims, like, I don't want to do them. And it's like, I know I have to, because the swim is no joke and there's high consequences if you fail during the swim. um, and so, but it's like it's just forcing myself, like, I'm going to do it anyways, and getting in the pool. And then almost always, like, once I get in the pool and I start swimming, like, I'm fine. Like, it's not, it's not that big of a deal then. It's just like, it's that forcing yourself, into that discomfort. Cause it's like, a lot of it's just do it. Same thing with the run. Like I said, I got home yesterday and it was like, I hadn't gotten my run in. It was 100 degrees. And I was like, I did not want to go run. And it's just like forcing, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be hot, super hot and super uncomfortable. But it's like, once I forced myself to just start doing it, like, I was fine once I got going. And then again, like, it's like, you're not thinking about the other stressors. You're just thinking about, the run itself and the temperature and all that other stuff. So it helps clear your mind.
And I think there's ways to kind of cheat commitment, just to jump in on that real quick, because I had the same problem with swimming. And I joined an adult swim team.
Yeah.
I never swam before in my life.
Yeah.
And I signed up because I was like, hey, I need something to get me to swim on 3 days a week or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And so I showed up and probably looked like the biggest fool in the world because I was struggling to stay afloat while swimming. But, doing stuff like that, or like I used to bike with a group of guys on Saturdays. It didn't matter how I felt on Saturday because I told them I was going to be there. And so, you can self-discipline is super important, but I've also found success in adding in some external discipline as well. Cause sometimes self-discipline won't get you there. You can only force yourself to do so much. So adding in a little bit of external pressure, at least for me personally, I've always found to be effective as well.
That's awesome. What do you think? So I guess as we're wrapping it up, if somebody's listening and say this is something they've never thought about, like doing uncomfortable things kind of on purpose or leaning into that discomfort, can you think of like maybe 2 or 3, like top recommendations you would have for somewhere just to get started with leaning into uncomfortable things?
Yeah, I think there's a book I think about by Cal Newport about habits, and my challenge would be a positive and a negative thing. Think about one thing that you wish you did in your life and one thing that you wish you didn't do. And so when Cal Newport talks about habits, he talks about they're really the most effective when you replace a habit with a different habit. Like, it's really hard to just stop doing something because you have nothing to fill that void. Like, whatever it is, if you have 2 drinks every night at 7 p.m. and you want to stop doing that, if you're just sitting there at 7 p.m. every night thinking about what you're not doing, super difficult to do. But if you said, hey, I want to run 2 miles every day, and you said, I'm going to do that at 7 p.m., and I'm going to replace taking 2 drinks at 7 p.m., they both become more achievable because you've replaced a habit with a different habit. And so what I would challenge people to do is pick a small thing. I really like the 10 pages a day. I think that's a really achievable goal. But pick something that you want to do in your life that you haven't done up to this point, and pick one thing that, however small it is, that you want to cut out of your life and just swap them. Replace it, change that habit. And then you're really killing 2 birds with 1 stone, where you're taking away a negative thing and then making a positive shift. And so it kind of becomes a double benefit. So that would be kind of my challenge to everybody, is think about it like that. I think it's a really helpful framework for kind of changing some easy habits.
That's cool. I really like that. I think I like the idea of picking a couple things and like leaning into them. So I think, I think like fitness, business or work related, and then personal. And I think for fitness, I think if somebody's wanting to lean into discomfort, I think a great way to get started is to pick something hard that's coming up in the future that forces you to train for it. And it could be anything. It doesn't I'm doing triathlon stuff right now. It doesn't have to be a triathlon. It could be, or it could be, if you're interested in running, a running race. If you're interested in weightlifting or CrossFit stuff, it could be a high rocks competition. Just pick something that kind of scares you and you're definitely not ready for. go a couple months out. Don't go too far. I'd say 3 to 6 months out, and then sign up for a competition, and then lean into the training to prepare for it the best you can. Because I think it doesn't matter what area of fitness. I mean, it could be jujitsu competition. It could be, whatever, swim race or anything, running. It could be like a 10K or a half marathon. It should be hard. So don't pick like the 5K, because that's, you can do that. Something that you're not sure you're going to be able to do, or something you're sure you're not going to be able to do unless you train for it. And then sign up for that, and then start training for it, and try to stick to a program. And it should be uncomfortable and it should be hard, but and then do the race or whatever it is, and you feel good afterwards. I think the personal side, I think leaning, like you said, most people don't read. So I think that just setting the 10 pages, but then pick an area of your life where you wish it was a little bit better, and then get a book that's about that. And so whether it's, again, work related or relationship with your wife or kids or whatever, and start there, and just force yourself to read 10 pages a day, even if it's not comfortable. I recommend knocking it out first thing, because otherwise it's easy to get sidetracked. And then business or work, like, so whether you have a job or you run a business or whatever, I think just picking there's almost always something where it's like, something you're avoiding. And so usually that's something you're avoiding is because it's uncomfortable thing. And I would just say leaning into that and trying to figure out how to deal with it and work through it. And a lot of times it's way easier than you think. So like, even if you work a job, it could be like, hey, the way we're doing this thing is not very good. And it's been really bugging me. And so maybe it's just like leaning into that and trying to figure out a better way to deal with it. Or maybe it's a coworker that you're not getting along with, and maybe it's leaning into that relationship and trying to figure out how to better that relationship. And so I just pick 3 things like that and really push on it. I think it's a great place to get started.
The only thing I would add, I love all those. Signing up for events is how I've advanced my endurance career, if you can call it that. But the other thing I would do, because I think you've got to figure out whether you're externally or internally motivated. And I think we're all a little different in that regard. But the only other component that I did is I would sign up for something, and then the next day I would tell a bunch of people what I'd signed up for. Yeah. And so if I didn't do it, I'd have to eat a bunch of crow from a lot of people. And, sometimes I need that little external bit on hard days where it's like, well, you know what? I told everybody at work that I was going to do this. And so do I want to go in tomorrow and somebody's going to ask me, hey, did you do this? And have to say no. And so that's just the only other thing that's worked well for me, that sometimes gives me that little push on hard days. It's like, well, I said I was going to do it. I told these people I was going to do it, so I have to finish,
Yeah. I suppose post it online and tag us, and we'll follow up with you. But again, sign up for something and pick a date. And we talked about it a little bit, but 75 hard is another great example, and that would kind of knock out a bunch of that. But that's another good one. If you're just looking for somewhere to start, you're not sure where, that's a perfect one, because that can meet you whatever stage you're in. Because I feel like it's designed in a way that anybody can take that off, and it's a big commitment, but it's kind of fun to go through that. Cool. Well, we appreciate you guys being with us. And if you're liking the podcast, please don't forget to like, share, comment if there's anything you think, we could do better, or anything you're liking, or if there's anything you'd like to hear us talk about. So it helps us come up with what we're going to be talking about. And then we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.